Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia Daf Tzadidalid. It's the daf for Shabbat. Today's daf is sponsored by Ruth Leah Kahan, Jessica Schlar, and Emily Michelson, in loving memory of their mother, Kadima Michelson. Kadima bat Harav Avram Tzvi ben Sion Bechaya on her 6th year at site. May her memory be a blessing. We're going to get started now with our daf. We're going to finish up the last section of the last Mishna. Then we're going to do the previous Mishna. Then we're going to do the last Mishna of the chapter, finish chapter 7, and begin chapter 8. So the first thing we're going to finish up with is this issue with listim coming when these bandits come and you're a roet zone, you're watching someone's sheep or flock and something happens. So Amarle Abai leRava. Abai asked Rava the following question. Eshkache ro'eh v'amarle. If the ro'eh meets the listim who come and says to him, Ganav asarya, you horrible filthy thief. Biduchta planya yatvina. We're sitting in this place, me and some other ro'et zone, other shepherds. We have this amount of people with us. We have this amount of dogs with us protecting our animals. And we have all these people who throw slingshots at you with stones. And the listim goes right ahead and steals the animals. So what's the situation? Now, why is this a question? Well, the assumption here is that the shepherd egged on the listim, and that by being so confrontational is basically a way of inviting or enticing the listim, the robber, the bandit, to kind of push his way through and steal it. So Amarle and Abai asked Rava, and Rava in fact says to him, yeah, Hare holchin lemakom dudei. Hare holichan lemakom dudei chayav listim. He basically, this ro'eh, the shepherd, led him right into a trap, or not even a trap, led him right into where their animals were and caused this listim basically to go take the animals. And basically, now it's a little bit tricky because you'd have to say that it was a case where the listim probably wasn't going to steal it in any case. I don't know why they were called the listim in that case, but it was basically a case where, on account of that pushing, that shepherd standing very strong and enticing him, calling him, you filthy thief, that actually caused the thief to actually be more aggressive, and therefore the shepherd is actually liable. It's kind of funny. You would think being tough maybe is a good thing, but here they're saying no, it's not. New mission. And here we get to a very famous topic that we've approached before, which is stipulations, and particularly stipulations that go against what the Torah says. So matneh shomer chinam liot patur mishvua. A shomer chinam, someone who's watching for free, can make a stipulation for the beginning. I'll watch your item as long as I don't have to take an oath. So if it gets stolen, I'm going to be exempt without having to take the oath. V'ashoel liot patur milashalem. And a shoel can be exempt from paying for onus damages, unexpected damages. Nosei sachar v'asochel. Again, we put here the nosei sachar together with the socher. The renter is considered like a shomer sachar. We already saw there's a machloket about that. Liot pturim mishvua milashalem. They could say, listen, we're not going to take an oath if it was onus, and we're going to be exempt no matter what. And if it was theft, we're not going to actually pay. Okay, the case where normally theft or loss, they would have to pay. We're not going to pay. So you can make that arrangement stipulation from the beginning. And then the Mishnah says something which seems to contradict, because the Mishnah says, but we're going to learn 3 things about Tanaim here. Stipulations. If you make a stipulation against what the Torah says, the stipulation is canceled, nullified, which means basically if you said, if this happens, then this. If you get rid of the if part, then the then is going to be anyway. So basically the contract will be fulfilled, or the agreement will be fulfilled even without the condition having to be filled. Let's talk about some examples about this later. This is actually, we're going to see later, this is specifically Rabbi Meir's opinion. In order for it to be a stipulation, it has to be like the one that Reuben God made in the time of the desert, which was, if we go out first, then we will inherit. Okay? That's what Moshe said to them, right? If you go first, then you will be able to inherit the land that you want in the Transjordan area. Now that started with, if you do this, then that. If you start with, you will inherit the land if you go out and are among the first to fight, then that's not a good stipulation. It's not valid. So if you say you will enter the land, you will get the land in the Transjordan area if you go fight first, you don't actually have to go fight first. You put the maaseh first, the action is, we're going to say that will come true even without the fulfillment of the stipulation. Okay, because it's not a valid t'nai. In order for it to be a t'nai that works, it has to be, if we do this, then that will happen. And third thing, if it's something that could actually be fulfilled, technically, right? Like, for example, Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, they could have gone out and fought first, and you stipulated it from the beginning. In other words, if eventually you'll be able to fulfill your Tanai at some point, meaning it's possible to fulfill. We'll talk about things that are impossible. So if it's possible to fulfill and you stipulated it from the beginning, then the stipulation is valid. But that seems to imply if it's something that's impossible to do, or you stipulated it later after you already made the agreement, then again, the stipulation is irrelevant. So now we're going to start with the beginning of the Mishnah. Amai, why can a shomer chinam or a shomer sachar or all these people make a stipulation against what it says in the Torah? This is a stipulation against what the Torah says, and it says in the Mishnah, if you make a stipulation against what the Torah says, it's not valid. Right? The stipulation is canceled, and your statement takes place no matter what, whether you fulfill your stipulation or not. So the answer, Hamane Rabbi Yehuda, we can say there are Mishnas Rabbi Yehuda Damal, who held in this area, Bidavar Shebimamon no Kayam. We've learned this already a number of times. If it's financial, something it says in the Torah that's financial issue, then you can actually make a stipulation against what it says in the Torah. You can say, we made an agreement that I'm going to wash your item for free, but you're willing to forego the issue of me taking an oath. I can just say it was stolen and we're done. Okay? Or I can be a shoel and not pay if onus happens to it. We can make that stipulation because it's financial. How do we know Rabbi Yehuda holds this? Titania, as it says in a bright. If a man says, you will be betrothed to me, says to a woman, on the condition that I'm not going to provide for you, share ksudunora, which are the 3 obligations the husband has to provide. Rabbi Meir says there is no such thing. That stipulation is just not true. He has to provide those things: food, clothing, and sexual relations. If he's not willing to provide them, no, well, she's right. Then he can't make a stipulation like that. And therefore, what would happen in this case? And here we're going to actually spell it out. He said, you will be betrothed to me under the condition that you're not going to have share ksufona. Okay, there's a bit of a problem with the order here also because the action comes first, but they're not focusing on that right now. But she's betrothed because we ignore the stipulation. He doesn't have to keep to that stipulation, right? He has to provide her with those things. The stipulation is out and the betrothal is good. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, b'davar shebimamon no kayam. He can make that stipulation. And he doesn't have to provide her with share ksut. Now, ona, he has to. That's not a davar shebimamon, sexual relations. But the financial stuff, food, clothing, he doesn't have to provide her. She can agree to it. If she agrees to it, well, then she's betrothed and he doesn't have to. He can basically keep to his part of not providing that for her. So our mission is like Rabbi Yehuda, but what's the problem? We're going to have a few issues. Number one, Rabbi Yehuda. How can we say the mission is Rabbi Yehuda? First of all, that whole statement. If you go against something it says in the Torah, your stipulation is invalid. That's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda said it isn't valid. It is valid. It's not nullified if it's financial. So halo kasha. That's not difficult. You could read that line according to Rabbi Yehuda because you could say lo lam Rabbi Yehuda he v'seifa b'davar she'eino shamamon. And that last part was talking about something that's not financial. It was saying if you make this stipulation when it doesn't come to something financial, well then the Tanai stipulation isn't valid. But we still have a problem. And the Seifa, second issue was saying is Rabbi Yehuda. Kol Tanai sheyesh bo maaseh b'tchilato tano batel. Man shamalei lachai svara. Who's the one who says if you started by saying the action and only after brought the stipulation, that's not valid? Well, who holds by that logic? That's Rabbi Meir, as I told you. Tanya Abachalachi Ishfar Chanan Yamal Mishum Rabbi Meir. Okay, quote Rabbi Meir is saying, tonight Kodem L'Maaseh is a tonight. Has to be the stipulation comes before the Maaseh, for the action. If this, then that. Then it's a Tanai. If you do Maaseh Kodem L'Tanai, first the Maaseh, then the Tanai, then ain't no Tanai. Then it's not a Tanai at all. And then again, the action will be valid even if you don't fulfill the stipulation. Therefore, Ela Kula Rabbi Meir. In the end, we have to say the whole Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. So now we're back to square one. Rabbi Meir says you can't go against something it says in the Torah. So how could you say I'll be a shomer chinam, but I won't take an oath? Well, what does it mean to be a shomer chinam? Shomer chinam isn't just someone who watches something for free. It's someone who watches something for free who kind of did, or I would say like this: if I watch something for free, I'm automatically a shomer chinam. But if you ask me to watch something and I say I'll watch it for free, but only if you don't make me take an oath, then I can agree to that in the first place. And then I'm not a shomer chinam that the Torah said. A shomer chinam that the Torah said is either there was no particular arrangement. The arrangement was I'll watch it for free. And the Torah says these are your levels of responsibility. But if in the beginning I said I don't want to be a shomer chinam by Torah law, I want to just I'll watch your item, but I'm not going to take an oath if something happens. If it gets stolen, you're just going to exempt me. We can make that arrangement. That doesn't go against what the Torah said. So that's the way you'd have to understand our Mishna. Tana. Now, our Mishnah, before we get to this Braita, this is quoting a Braita. Before we get to it, I just want to point out the Mishnah brought all these cases where somebody makes a stipulation. I'm not going to assume the level of responsibility that the Torah demanded of me for that category. And that's okay, we just said, even according to Rabbi Meir. Now, this Braita brings the other direction. You can also assume more responsibility. You can say, I'm paid to watch this. I won't touch your item. I won't do anything with it. But I'll even assume responsibilities for onus, for unexpected damages. Bidvarim. So the Gemara asks, what? Just by saying it, I'm already obligated to be like a shoel by my words alone. Usually words aren't so, we have seen lots of different things about words, but Gemara is asking here, don't you need a kinyan or something to accept that level of responsibility for it to actually be enforceable by a court? So Shmuel says, yeah, you're right. There must be there was a kinyan done here. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, what do you mean? Even if we didn't do a kinyan, still someone could say, I'll watch it and get paid, and I will assume responsibilities like a shoel and be chayav for ones. How so? I get a good reputation in town. If I watch your item without using it, and I assume all responsibilities, people will talk about me on the street. Wow, what a good person she is. Well, through the benefit I get from people saying that about me on the street, Gamar Mishabe Nafshe. On account of that, I am gaining something more than just being a shomer sachar, because I get an excellent reputation. That already is worth something to me. And therefore, with that, I will acquire to you, I will commit to you the fact that I will pay even in onus damages. Now we're going to go to that last line in the Mishnah. With this, we'll finish up our chapter. This is if something could actually happen, then it's a stipulation. But if it can't actually happen, that's the inference from the Mishnah, then it's not a valid stipulation, in which case the action will be valid even without the fulfillment of the condition. So Amar Rav Tavla Amarav, so Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. By the way, our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema against the rabbis. Aval Chachamim omrim she'av al pi she'efshar lo lekaymo b'safo v'yitzna alav mitchilato t'nei kayam. The rabbi said even if it can't be fulfilled in the end, if you stipulated it from the beginning, it's then basically you have to, if it's a valid stipulation. So if it's impossible to fulfill, then your statement was a meaningless statement. We're going to see one right now. Titania. Funny line, although it's pretty sad. This will be your get if, on the condition that you go up to the heavens. A little bit strange, right? Okay, first of all, nowadays maybe there's space travel. But in those days where there was no space travel, this was impossible. So this isn't a stipulation she could ever fulfill. It'll never be a get. On the condition that you go all the way down to the depths. We don't mean just going underground. We mean going really far down. That you swallow a reed that's 100 cubits long. If that's not possible. You walk through the Yam Gadol, the Mediterranean. Nobody could walk through the Mediterranean. Nitzkayem hatznai, harei ze get. Lo nitzkayem hatznai, eno get. The rabbis say, if she can do this, which she can't, it'll be a get. If not, it's not a get. She didn't fulfill the stipulation. So what if it's impossible? It's a stipulation. Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema omer, kazed get. Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says, no, this is a get. Klal amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. Now we're going to explain his opinion. Kol she'iyafshar lo l'kaimo b'safo, if it's impossible, and yet you stipulated that, eno ela k'mafliga v'kashel. You're just exaggerating. And really, right, he's just trying to irritate his wife. He's just trying to say something to really annoy her. Okay, we saw this in Gittin, that sometimes, and unfortunately, we see it in reality. The men use this as power tool, and they tease their wife with it, and he was just teasing her. He's like, oh, this will be your get if you go up to the heavens, as if like, I'm not really giving it to you. But he is giving it to her because there's no such thing according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. You can't do that. You can't fool around with that. That's a meaningless statement. So if you make a meaningless statement, we're going to treat it as meaningless. So we're going to accept the part that you said this is a get, and just your condition is out the window because your condition, your stipulation is just invalid. And in fact, thankfully for women, in this case particularly, right? It's a general thing, but particularly in the case of women, we hold like Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, and in fact, this will be a valid get. We ignore the fact that he said this ridiculous thing, stipulation. And he says you can even further infer this from our Mishna, because that's what our Mishna holds. So it makes sense that we hold like Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema because our Mishna matches that. Because Dikatane, again, it's pretty much clearly inferred from the Mishnah. As we read the Mishnah, we understood it this way, but remember, the Mishnah doesn't really say it. The Mishnah just says, if you can do it in the end, fulfill the condition, and you made the stipulation from the beginning, tno kayam, and your tnai is valid. But from there, you can infer if it's impossible, then your tnai is actually, your stipulation is totally invalid, and now we can infer from there that we must hold like Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. And with that, Hadran alach hasocher et ha'poalim, moving on to the new chapter, Ashol et ha'para. Before we get there, let's review what we did so far. We started with the case of the Ro'eh, who enticed the listim and therefore had to assume responsibility. Then we moved on to cases where a shomer can stipulate something different from what the Torah says, and we allow it, even though in general you can't go against Mashkatub Torah. And we saw 3 issues in order to make a stipulation valid. That the stipulation will actually take hold, and if not that, then the stipulation is not stipulation. We, in the end, explained the Mishna must be according to Rabbi Meir, not according to Rabbi Yehuda. We thought at the beginning, because how does the first part work with the second part? But then we said, no, actually, the whole thing's Rabbi Meir, because this isn't really a case of making a stipulation against what the Torah says. When the shomer sachar agrees to, or the other side agrees to have the shomer sachar do less, or the shomer chinam do less, because that was the arrangement from the beginning, and it's not like it really goes against what the Torah said. And we saw also that the last part was, for example, according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. And with that, we went through the 3 different issues about stipulations in the Mishnah. Now we're going to move on to She'ela B'Balim, okay, which as we go through this chapter, we'll get to understand better and understand the ideas behind it, because this Shabbat Daf, I'm going to leave the concepts behind it for after. So now we're going to start with Hasho'elet Bara v'Sha'al Ba'aleima. We're going to have 2 different cases of She'ela B'Balim, which works, which basically, again, what is She'ela B'Balim? It means if, we're going to see it right now, but if you're working for me and then ask me to watch something of yours, or I borrow something of yours, I don't have the same liability, because the Torah said, Im ba'alav imo, if the owner is there, which basically means if the owner is already working for me, is subjugated to me somehow, then I'm exempt from the onus damages. So we're now going to talk about 2 cases where there is She'ela B'Balim and 1 case where it's not. If it all happens at the same time, I borrow your cow at the same time that I'm borrowing you to do work for me, and I ask you to schlep my chairs across the street, at the same time I'm going to borrow your cow. Or I hired you to schlep my chairs across the street. Case 2. I first hired you to move my chairs, or asked you to move my chairs without paying you. It doesn't matter either which way. Then and then I borrowed your cow. So either the interactions happened at the same time, or first you were working for me, then, right, we talked about it the last time, a taxi driver. you're taking me in your taxi. I paid you already to do that, or I hired you to do it. Whether I paid you or not, it doesn't matter. And then I borrow your phone. I don't have responsibility because you're already subjugated to me. Umeta, right? And then the para dies. In this case, it's a para, not a phone. Shenema, okay, patur, you're exempt. Shenema, im ba'alav imo lo yishalem. The owner's with you, which means the owner is already working for you. That's how we understand it. But ava, but case number 3, right? And then it said, you're patur, in the pasuk it says, ava, okay, it's starting on Amud Bet now. Sha'alat ha'para v'achar kach sha'alat ha'balim. Oscharan v'meta chayav. But if first I borrowed the para, and when we made the arrangement of the borrowing, you weren't working for me at all. And later I hired you. Well, even while I'm still borrowing the para, the cow, it doesn't matter. I'm still obligated because at the time, shenemar ba'alav einimo, if the owner wasn't with me at the time that we made the agreement, then shalem yishalem. Then I have to pay. So the Gemara starts off and wants to understand what's the difference between case 1 and case 2, because we're going to have a little problem. It seems like, right, with the obvious difference, in case 1, it happened all at the same time. Case 2, first you were working for me, then I borrowed something from you. So the Gemara says, the second, seifa is the end, but it's not really the end, it's the second case here, and compared to the beginning. After then, I borrowed the para after you were already working for me. Michlal dereisha, it seems to infer the first case. Dekatani ima mamash. When it says with you, that it all happened at the same time. That's how we understood it. That was the simple reading. Remember, it's the same ruling, right? For both, it means this is sheila bebalim, but it's listed here as 2 different cases. So ima mamash mimishkachala. But how could you possibly have this all happen at once? Any time of happening at once would have to be consecutive. One happened first and then the other one happened. Why? Because how do you acquire the para when I borrow a para? Only when I'm moshech, when I pull it. Para b'mishicha. And when did you assume responsibility to work for me? Alim ba'amira. There's no kinyan there. I hired you to do something. Just by saying you're hired, that happened at the same time. Right? That's the moment it kicks in. Now, if we made an arrangement that you're going to be working for me, and I'm going to borrow your para all at the same time, but the arrangement, the verbal agreement, happened first. And that's when you become my worker. The next stage is I pull the para. When I pull the para, well, then you're already working for me. Then it doesn't happen at the same time. If it doesn't happen at the same time, it's the exact same case as case 2 in the Mishna. The first you were working for me, then I borrowed your para. So that's why they say it doesn't make any sense, because para b'mishicha ba'alim ba'amiran, the amira is going to come before the mishicha, the pulling. In which case, it doesn't make any sense that this is any different for case 2. They're really all one and the same. First, you were working for me, then I borrowed your cow. So we're going to have 2 answers. If the whole arrangement happened in my domain, your cow happened to be in my domain, and then I said I'm going to borrow it at the same time as you're going to work for me and shlet my chairs, well, as soon as we made the verbal agreement, the animal's in my domain, so I already acquired it right then and there at that moment. Or, alternative is to say, if we stipulated from the beginning, talk about stipulations, that this, you're not going to be acquired to me until I pull the para. And then when I pull the para, that's when the agreement takes effect between the work relationship between us. And then it would be a different case, because it would all happen at the same time. Okay, now we're going to quote this Mishna that we saw in Daf Gimel, the basic Mishna about the 4 shomrim, Tananatam, and then we're going to trace them back to the Torah. Okay, if you remember, there's 4 shomrim, but in the Torah there are only 3 sections that talk about shomrim. And then we said, right, which one's missing? The socher, the renter, and we have this machlok of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. It's not even clear who says what about whether the socher is like the shomer sachar or like the shomer china. We saw in our Mishnah today already that the socher is like the shomer sachar in the case of our Mishnah, and likewise in this Mishnah, sides on the side that it's like the shomer sachar. Tananatam. Today we're going to see where we get these from the psukim and where they come from, and the details about them and how we derive them from the verses. Which section is talking about which shomer? And maybe it would be a good time to just mention here, to start reading the psukim. The first section starts in chapter 22 of Shemot, verse 6. I'm not going to read the whole verse, but you gave your friend. Now, it doesn't say anything about paying or not paying. we're going to assume this first section is the shomer chinam, money or vessels to watch, and gunav mi beit haish, and it's stolen. Imi Metzia ganav yishalem shnayim. Right? So if you find the ganav has to pay double. And if you lied, if you remember, and claimed that it was stolen, it wasn't really stolen, and you're found out, then you have to pay double payment, which we always understood that to be about a shomer chinam. Then it says, Ki chamor or shor chol be'ema lishmor umeit o mishpar o mishpa ein roeh. The second section is if you give your friend animal. Notice the difference. The first one was kesef o kelim, which, by the way, is one of the reasons, although we're going to have a different reason in today's daf, as to why we think it's a shomer chinam. Because generally, money or vessels you might give someone to watch for free, but animals, no one will watch it for free because they have to pay money to feed the animal and take care of the animal. There's a lot more work involved. So that's why one of the reasons why they assume the second section is a shomer sachar, even though it never says that one's working for free and this one's working for money in the text. But we'll see a different reason why they think it's a shomer sachar in the second case. Umeit o nishbar o mishpa, and the animal dies, or it gets broken, like a leg breaks, or it gets taken into captivity, which really means someone, right, seized it with force and grabbed it. Ein roeh, and nobody saw, so you take an oath, and then you get exempt, because that's all three cases of onus, unexpected damages. But if it's stolen, then you have to pay. Then it goes Pasuk Gimel 13, V'chish al ish mi'im re'eu v'nishbar omet, ba'alav eini mo shalem shalem. If you borrow something, and the owner's not there, remember that's she'la b'balim, and it breaks or dies. Notice, nishba, taken captivity, is missing, even though we said that was the case of onus. But if it breaks a leg or dies, you're exempt. Why is that? Because it's onus. Right? That's what we talked about is onus. So now the Gemara is going to say, we're going to talk about what the level of responsibility, which we already know. Tanan Atam, the Mishna is going to say, Arba'a shomrim hem, shomer chinam, v'shoel, nafsei sachar, v'asochel, those four, right? Someone who watches for free, someone who borrows, someone who gets paid to watch, and someone who rents. Shomer chinam nishba alakol. Shomer chinam has to take an oath, meaning they're exempt for anything, except for pshia, which, intentional damages. But otherwise, they take an oath, and they're exempt. Shoel mishalem et hakol. On the other extreme, we have the borrower, who has to pay everything. Nosei sachar v'asocher nishba'in al hashpura v'al hashpuya v'al hameta. So the socher has to take an oath, and the shomer sachar, the one who gets paid, and the renter, both, because again, according to this, they're the same, has to pay for broken leg, has to pay for, it can take an oath if the leg broke, if it was taken into captivity, or if the animal died. U'mishalmim et ha'aveda ve'et ha'gneva. Right, and they're exempt from those payments, but when it comes to Gneva Vaveda, they have to pay. Menani Mile, where do we get this from? Well, the Tanu Rabbanan, because it says in a Braita. Here we're going to get to what I mentioned before. Parasha Rishona Ne'em Rabba Shomer Chinam. The first section in the Torah, chapter verse 6, starts off with the shomer chinam, who said you take an oath and exempt yourself from the damages. Shniya b'shomer sachar. The second is the shomer sachar, who again is exempt from onus, b'chayiv and gneva v'aveda. Shlishit b'shoel. The third is a shoel, to which the Gemara says, Bishlam shlishit b'shoel. I get that. Mifolash. It says explicitly. It says if you borrow. That's pretty clear. It's talking about borrowing. Maybe it's flipped. Maybe the first section is someone who gets paid, and the second section is someone who does for free. So now, as I said, they're going to give a different reason to the one I gave before. They're going to give a different reason why they think the second one is shomer sachar. Because you're obligated in gneva v'aveda, and therefore, obviously, we're going to be more strict with someone who gets paid to watch from someone who does it for free. And since the second section is more strict because you have to pay if it gets stolen or lost, makes sense. It would be the one who gets paid to watch the object. To which the Gemara says, what do you mean? There's a chomer in the first section too. Maybe it's a chomer in the first section because the first section is the one who got paid. What's the chomer? If I claim it was stolen, and I'm a shomer, right, and I according to the first section, which we think is a shomer chinam, I watched it for free. I can take an oath if it got stolen and say it got stolen. What if I lie under oath? If I lie under oath and say it got stolen and I really stole it, then I have to pay double payment. In the second section, I don't have to pay the double payment because anytime it's stolen, I actually have to pay for the object. So I never incur a double payment, which means there's a stringency in the first section. So maybe the first section is a shomer sachar, the double payment. in a case of a shomer who claims it was stolen and lied under oath. To which the Gemara says, afilu hachi, and we've learned this before, karna below shvua adifa mikfela b'shvua. To pay the keren anytime it's stolen, the principal, without you having taken an oath at all, is obviously more strict than having to pay double in the event that you took an oath. Because how often does it happen that you take an oath, right? The more common case is it gets stolen. Every time it gets stolen, you're going to have to pay. That's the bigger stringency than in the event that I lied under oath. And then it turns out, right, that I found out I then have to pay double. That's a rare occurrence, possibly because it's rare, or it's just, right, we're going to basically say that the keren paying the principal anytime it's stolen is obviously more strict. And how are we going to prove this? Well, the shoel is the best proof because the shoel doesn't ever have to pay kefel because the shoel always has to pay for damages, which means they don't ever acquire the kefel payment. Remember, the shomrim who lied under oath falsely incurs this double payment because he really stole it. But all these other people have to pay for it, and therefore they never have to pay for it right away when it's stolen. So what do you see? Or the shoel, because all the benefits of the shoel, gets to use the item. She doesn't have to pay anything for it. So anyone who borrows is in a much better place than anyone else, right? They get all the benefits, and yet the law isn't strict. They don't have a kefel payment, but they do have to pay keren, the principal always, without an oath. So therefore, that must be a stringency. And that's why the second section is actually more stringent than the first, and that's why the second section must be the shomer sachar, and the first section is the shomer chinam. To which the Gemara asks, wait a minute, a shoel, all the benefits? Wait a minute, what do you mean? If I borrow your animal, habaya mazone, I have to feed your animal. If I borrow your car, I have to put gas in it. I take care of it if something breaks. To which they answered, the kaima bagam, maybe it's a case, right? In a case where the animal is in a marsh and eats the food from the marsh there, and there's reeds and things in the water, and they just eat their own food. I don't have to pay for food. So there are cases where I could borrow and not have to pay for food, in which case it shows that, yes, there are cases where all the benefits are for the owner, right, for the borrower. The habaya nitira, but you also have to watch the animal. It could be a place where there's already guards in the city and you don't have to watch the animals because there's guards who are watching all the animals in the city. Like you live in a gated community, let's say. Maybe you should just change the words. Maybe don't say all the benefits, most of the benefits. Still, right? More relatively speaking to all the other shomrim. Or third answer, or fourth answer, b'shelat kelim. If it's vessels, you don't have to feed them. You don't have to necessarily watch them so much. Kind of watched in your house, and there's no extra watching, if you're already anyway watching over things in your house. And therefore, you could have a case where really all the benefits are the borrowers. Now we're moving on to the next line in the Mishna. So the nosei sachar, the one who gets paid to watch, and the renter takes an oath for broken, if it was taken, right, by force, like captivity, and meta, and if it dies. And they pay for anything that's lost or stolen. So let's go through. Bishlama Geneva, we understand Geneva because it says in the Pasuk, Im Ganovi Ganev Meimo Shalem Leba'alav. If it's stolen from the shomer, the shomer has to pay the owner. Ela Aveda Benala, but where do we get Aveda from? Titania Im Ganovi Ganev and Liela Geneva Aveda Minayin Talmud Omer Im Ganovi Ganev Mikom Makom. Double language. Why does it say Ganovi Ganev? If it is stolen. Stolen, if you say it in English, you'd say it once. Why is Hebrew? And here it says Ganovi Ganev. Sounds like two languages. One is Geneva, one is Aveda. To which they say, Hani Chalaman Damar Lo Torah Kilashon B'nei Adam. Depends on your approach to the Torah in general. You say the Torah never uses any extra words, never speaks like people on the street. Torah has its own unique, special language. If it uses any extra word, it's for a purpose. Then you can darshan this. But if you say the Torah just speaks like, uses the language like people use on the street, then people say Ganovi Ganev. So it's just a way of speaking. It's not it includes something extra. So Amrei b'Marava Kal v'chomer. In Israel, they explain like this. Okay, it's a Kal v'chomer to resolve that issue. Uma Geneva shekrova la'ones mishalem, Aveda shekrova l'pshia lo kol sheken. If Geneva, which is close to ones, right? Geneva, right? What did I do if it got stolen? It's not really my fault. But Aveda, on a scale, Aveda, losing something, you're usually more responsible. It's your fault somewhat for losing something. So you're more likely to be liable. So if you're chayav for Geneva, you're obviously going to be chayav for Aveda also. The idach, what about the person then who said we learned it from Ganovi Ganev? Why didn't he learn it from the Kavachomer? To which they answer, sometimes there's things you learn through a Kavachomer, which sometimes the pasuk tells you anyway. In other words, yes, you could have learned it, but it still tells it in the pasuk. Anyway, to stress it. Next section. Hashoel Mishalem Takol. Bishlama Shvura V'Meita. We understand Shvura V'Meita because that's what it says in the verse. Remember I mentioned before, it only says if it breaks or dies. It doesn't say Shvuya. It says one or the other. And how do we know that if it was taken captive, if someone took it forcefully, you're going to be obligated also? Maybe you learn it from Shvuro Meita of the shomer sachal. No, or maybe maybe you would just say, look, if you're liable if the animal breaks a leg or dies, then you'll be liable also if it was taken by force. But you could say no, because when I borrowed this, I knew that it could possibly break a leg or just die. That just happens. But tomar b'shvuya, okay, virtually very relevant, right? How often do people or objects or animals get taken into captivity? It's not the most common thing. Fortunately, right now it's happened, but it's very uncommon. Maybe it's something you never would have thought would have happened. So maybe a shoal won't actually be responsible for it. So that first answer didn't work. We'll try a second and a third answer. We're going to have problems with each of them. And with that, we'll finish for today. In the middle. In the shomer sachar case, it said you're not going to be obligated if it broke a leg, got taken into captivity, or died. And by the shoel, the borrower, it just said two of them. But since in the shomer sachar case, it said all three, and in the shoel case, it said two, it meant two and the third one. Now, why you would switch is a good question. But that's what they're saying right now. Just like the shvuya is added there, afkan shvuya, we would add the shvuya here too. To which the Gemara says, no, ikal mifrach, you can knock that out because malav shomer sachal sheken liftol, tomar b'shoel sheken liyuv. But wait, it's very different. There, it's trying to say you're exempt if it's onus. So it added that case. But here, to make you obligated, we're gonna. How can you obligate someone in something just by saying, oh, the word's missing, but let's just assume we're gonna hop it, skip as if it's there and make you obligated? To make you obligated, it's more right. You would think we need to be more explicit about it. So that's a problem. Third answer. Elek Rabbanit. The Tanya Rabbanit aware. Oh, lerabot shvuya. Nice. It's very simply. Why does it say nishbar omet? It could have said nishbar v'met. Now, vi in the Torah could be sometimes used as or sometimes used as en. Usually it's en, but often it can be used as or. Well, that's going to be part of the problem with Rabbanit here. Rabbanit is basically going to say it could have just said broken or died and died, and we would have meant broken or died. But it says oh, so the oh is unnecessary. Oh must mean to include shvuya. To which the Gemara says, what do you mean? What do you mean? Oh is needed to say or. It's not nishbar v'mei, and it's or. So or is or. Why are you learning something from that? You would have thought, if you didn't say or, maybe you need adimitafra v'meita l'machayev. It would have to first break a limb and then die, and only then would you be obligated. That could have been a simple reading of the text if it said end. So they say it really depends on your approach, right? So hanicha. So right now they're going to say kamashal, and that's why you need the O, and the O is there to tell you that, and you can't learn O for shvuya. So they're going to say, well, you could explain it well if you hold like Rabbi Yonatan. Ela Rabbi Yoshia ma'ikal meimar. In a second, we're going to see what they say, because basically it's going to break down to Rabbi Yonatan thinks ve could mean O, or, and then or is really unnecessary, and it works according to him. For Rabbi Yoshia, who thinks that ve always means end, never means or. And therefore, it's unnecessary. Therefore, it's needed for or, and you can't use it to learn about a shvuya. And that's where we're going to be left with the question today. We'll resolve it tomorrow. So, what's Rabbi Yonatan, Rabbi Yoshia? Detanya isha sheri kalel et aviv et imo. If you cursed your father and your mother, you get the death penalty. Now it says and your mother. So, eli ala aviv v'imo. If you only have aviv and you have to curse both in order to get the death penalty. What if you only curse one? Aviv below imo, imo below aviv. What if it's just your father, just your mother? Minayin, how do we know you're going to be obligated? That's from a different drasha because it says, the end of that pasuk, Talmud Lomar, aviv imo kilel. Now, notice in the beginning of the pasuk, it says, Isha kalel et aviv, the klala goes next to aviv. The end of the pasuk, it says, imo, aviv v'imo kilel. And the klala is next to the word imo. So from there, you learn each one separately. But aviv kilel imo kilel, right? That's to Rabbi Yoshia, because ve et imo really means only and. And therefore, we're stuck with Rabbi Yoshia because the O in our pasuk is there. It's necessary to say we don't mean and, we mean or. And therefore, it's not free to learn shvuya. But Rabbi Yonatan actually works well for him because he says, you could say cursing both of them will get you the death penalty, or cursing either one of them will get you the death penalty just from the words aviv ve'etimo, because aviv ve'etimo means, could mean or, could mean and then O in our pasuk would be unnecessary. Unless it says yachdav, then you know it's both together. If it doesn't say that, it could be either or. So we're left with a question against Rabbi Yoshia, which in other words, how we've learned this shvuya according to Rabbi Yoshia. We'll get to that tomorrow. So we did in the second part today's stuff is we started with Sheila Babalim. We have 3 cases, 2 of them, which would be a case where you're exempt because of Sheila Babalim, and the third where you're not. If the Sheila happened before there was this relationship between them, that one was working for the other. And then we went into number 1, what's the difference between case 1 and case 2? How could they actually be different? We had to explain how we could have a case where it's different. And then we got into just the 4 shomrim and where we find them in the Torah and where we find the details in the Torah. And what about the details are mentioned, right? Like the shvuya, where do we get it from? With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Tov, and B'sorot Tovot.